Good evening and welcome to the Hampstead Synagogue online, and a very warm welcome to all our guests all over the internet, whether you're watching over Twitter, Facebook or YouTube. A very warm welcome to the Hampstead Synagogue. And for those of you who don't know about us, we are an Orthodox community based in London, England. We are normally housed in our original 1892 building in one of the so-called cathedral synagogues of the United Kingdom. And our parent organization is the United Synagogue under the religious authority of the Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis. Welcome to this series, which we call Where Are We Now? And it really hides two other questions. How is the Jewish community faring under the coronavirus? And secondly, perhaps more importantly, what are going to be the immediate concerns in the post-corona era? And we very much hope that will be very, very soon indeed. All the thank yous will be done at the end of the session, but a special thank you to our media partner, the Jewish Chronicle. And if you want to find out what is going on in the Jewish world, whether in the UK or overseas, you can go to thejc.com. Two extraordinary announcements today. First of all, I should explain again to the people that the late Michael Friedman called the out-of-towners, who might not be aware of this. The Jewish community is in what is known as the 3 weeks, a semi-mourning period. We will be featuring music in this live broadcast, but we will be giving warning if you do not want to listen to music. So all you need to do is mute your speakers. And you might ask, well, why are we doing it anyway? Well, of course, we can use the recording afterwards, so people can listen to the music then. And another first for us tonight, we're going to have an advertisement break. More about that later. Okay, so now let me introduce, I should point out that my name is Gabriel Herman, and together with Madeleine Abramson, who you'll be meeting later on tonight, we are co-chairs of Hampstead Synagogue. And hopefully Madeleine won't be making an unscheduled appearance tonight. For those of you who watch the rest of the series, you'll understand what I mean. So let me please introduce our guest this evening. Michael Goldstein is the president of the United Synagogue. He was elected president in July 2017. And actually, I was there, Michael, so I well remember that evening. Michael is proud to be a product of the United Synagogue. His formative years were spent attending both Ilford Synagogue and Ilford Jewish Primary School. He married Lara in Western Marble Arch, and the first 13 years of married life was spent in Chigwell, where he served on the board of management. Board of management of Chigwell Synagogue, I assume, not of Chigwell. Since moving to Mill Hill in 2003, Michael has served on the board and was vice chairman and chairman for 7 years. During this period, he led the redevelopment of the community building and oversaw the growth in membership. He was able to draw a large number of young leaders into the community, and that has continued to date. Michael and Lara have 4 daughters. This biography hasn't changed. It's still 4 daughters, is it? There's no additions.
There are additions, but don't worry.
Okay.
One granddaughter.
Very nice. Professionally, Michael is currently chief executive of a large private property company. And other viewers of this series will know that we had his brother on only recently, and we did extend our wishes for a long life to him, and we do so to you, Michael, and we hope you extend that to the rest of your family. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Gabriel, and thank you to the wonderful Hampstead community for inviting me this evening. I know this has been a very successful and popular series, so hopefully that will continue this evening. We're in an interesting place in terms of the world, the community, the United Synagogue. So I thought I would reflect, if you don't mind, that yesterday on Tuesday, we celebrated the 150th anniversary of the United Synagogue. And we're in the middle of this COVID crisis, this pandemic, which no one has experienced before. But one of the issues that it has really identified, in my view, is the importance of community. Community has changed. We're used to a physical community. We've now become much more of a virtual community. So I'd like to explore what it is that we mean by community, why we think it's important, talk a little bit about the United Synagogue and how it was created and why it was created, and then look at the challenges that the United Synagogue creation was created to actually challenge, and how those challenges are actually, whether they are any different than they are today. So community, kehillah, is our framework of Jewish belonging. It's our collective expression of Jewish identity. We say in Pirkei Avot, we learn that Kol Yisrael Arevim Zel Lazel, all Jews are responsible for each other. So community is, in my view, this collective expression of Jewish identity, and that's what we've tried to adapt to in the last 4 months. But inbuilt in this is a deep sense of mutual responsibility, something that, again, we've seen hugely across our communities over the last few. We always see it. We've particularly seen it with the Chesed work that has been going on. So Jews care about institutions. We really are passionate about institutions. We like buildings, and your building is certainly a building that we all love, but we care about institutions. Buildings house institutions, and it is they that are the true vehicles of the divine presence. So institutions are more than meet the eye, and we see that every day that we're involved with them. They embody values, principles, and ways of life, and we can all get frustrated by the routine nature of institutional functions, but they're able to turn abstract ideas into tangible and living relationships. So our institutions, the Jewish home, our studies, our houses of study, and our places of prayer, this is where Judaism is best expressed. And as an organization, we try and coordinate between home, shul, and school, because we know that's the best way of promoting Jewish identity and Jewish continuity. So the United Synagogue, what is the United Synagogue about, and why was it created? So the Jews, when they returned to the UK in the 1650s, the Ashkenazi communities congregated and lived in the east side of the city of London, and there were 5 large synagogues. But those large 5 synagogues were independent synagogues. So every good story needs a beginning. And the beginning of the United Synagogue started, even though it was created in 1870, in the Sukkah of Chief Rabbi Nathan Adler on the 24th of September, 1866. Over breakfast with the wardens of the Great Synagogue in Duke's Place, he urged an alliance of the leading Ashkenazi synagogues of London. So whilst there were, as I said, 5 strong synagogues, there remained, though, the fact that individual synagogues were just that, local congregations with highly localized concerns. And this gave rise, you won't be surprised, to the question of who was responsible for matters that cut across congregational loyalties. These were the issue of welfare and the needs of the poor. Synagogues accepted the fact that they were responsible for the charitable needs of their own members, but what of the poor who were not members of any synagogue? And there were incidents, particularly at the end of the 18th century, in which paupers were left unburied for several days, while synagogues argued amongst themselves as to which should bear the cost of the funeral. And then there was the question of the movement of Jews away from the area of the first settlement in the city of London East End. As the established Jews of London reached a degree of affluence and social integration, they moved westward to Marylebone, Bayswater, Westminster, and then eventually to Hampstead at the end of the 18th century, and sought the 19th century, and sought to establish congregations there. This was resisted by the older synagogues, who saw in this development a loss of membership, revenue, and prestige for themselves. But resistance carried a price, and the price was just a lack of coordination and a lack of sustainability. And there were border issues. If somebody wanted a bar mitzvah in one shul, they remember of another, or someone wanted their daughter married in one synagogue, they remember another. This was just a constant, you can imagine, a constant argument. So they basically decided, these 4 synagogues decided that they needed, that if the congregations were going to grow, and if the Anglo Jewry and London Jewry was going to grow, there needed to be a coherent plan for its development. In particular, the need to finance and build places of worship in the new areas of Jewish population. It called for a pooling of resources and an amalgamation of the strength of the existing communities if they were to become the midwives of enlarged and geographically more diffuse London Jewry. So when Chief Rabbi Adler, 154 years ago, entertained his guests to breakfast in the Sukkah, it had been already a long debate that had gone on, but they basically decided to join forces between those congregations. So on the 14th of July, 1870, the Jewish United Synagogue Bill received royal assent, having been approved by Parliament. The first 5 synagogues were the Great Synagogue, the Hambro Synagogue, which was an offshoot of the Great Synagogue, the New Synagogue in Leadenhall Street, Central Synagogue, which is still functioning at Great Portland Street, and the Bayswater Synagogue, not to be confused with the New West End in St. Petersburg Place. But the United Synagogue's great achievement is in the undertaking that it set itself in its name, Kehilah Kadosha Knesset Israel, Holy Congregation, the Congregation of Israel. This was a bold aspiration. It meant that it set itself as far as possible to sustain the traditional nature of the Jewish community as a collective body dedicated to the service of God and the continuation of the covenant. But what I find most inspiring is that when I sit with my fellow trustees and discuss the priorities for today's United Synagogue, with 62 synagogues and a plethora of facilities that we provide to the Orthodox community, our challenges are very, very similar to those challenges that our founding fathers set themselves 150 years ago. Ensuring that the central function of the United Synagogue is effective to support our shuls, that the infrastructure of the Orthodox world is working well, the Beit Din, the Kashrut division, burial, shechita, etc., etc., that our chief rabbi is properly resourced and supported in the vital work that he does, both within our community and as our representative to the wider community. Deciding on where new communities can be, we can talk about that later in terms of the initiatives that we've done in creating new communities across London and in the suburbs. And at the other end of the lifestyle, we spend time with older communities whose memberships are declining. This is often a difficult and delicate task as we help them to adapt to falling numbers and prepare for the eventual sale of property, which is vital for the US to be able to invest in new areas. And we have various other areas of initiatives to ensure that we grow. So in conclusion, the founders of the US had the vision that we are stronger together, stronger to ensure that individual communities are healthier, the funding and maintenance of the infrastructure of Orthodox life can be sustained, the creation of new communities can be achieved, the encouragement to participate, and the education of our members can be strengthened so that we can jointly ensure that our wonderful heritage is continued. Gabriel.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I don't know whether people are experiencing some technical problems, but we're endeavouring to keep going. And I hope everybody heard all of that presentation, which I think was quite fascinating and gave us some context about the history of the United Synagogue. Hampstead Synagogue was a proud member of the United Synagogue when we were born in 1892, and we were at one time the biggest and the largest congregation within the United Synagogue. And the reason we was because there was no other synagogue north of Hampstead at that particular time. I suppose Boreham Wood now probably takes.
Boreham Wood is now the largest community, yes. Though they have more than one shul, but it's the largest community, yeah.
So any further north will probably be in Manchester. So we'll have to keep moving.
We have communities in Sheffield and Birmingham now. So yes.
Well, yes, that's an interesting point, because when the United Synagogue was founded, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, the Victorian lawmakers, because that's where charities formed, were a bit nervous about creating an established synagogue as opposed to an established church. And so they limited the United Synagogue to only operate in the London area. I'm right about that, aren't I?
Yeah, but that was changed quite a long time ago now. Yeah.
Exactly so. Now, I just want to remind everybody watching out there that you can actually ask questions too. And if you just message a question, we should be able to pick it up here in the room, and I'll put it to Michael as we go on. But Michael, I want to bring us back to the present now, and also to reflect about how the community has been faring under this current crisis. And I want to remind you about a letter that you wrote to the Jewish Chronicle, where you were basically responding to an attack on the rabbis. It's very traditional for the Jewish Chronicle to start attacking rabbis. But you talked very personally about how rabbis helped you at the time of your family crisis, as it were. And I wondered whether or not you wanted to reflect on the importance of rabbis within the United Synagogue, and particularly at the moment.
No, I think, rabbi is a leader, and whilst obviously we will have a lay structure and a professional structure that supports our rabbis, there is no doubt that our rabbinic leadership, as we like to call them, are central to the sustenance of the community. They are teachers, they are leaders, and certainly over the last few months, when we've had this, completely where worlds have been turned upside down, and the personal interactions in terms of eye-to-eye contact has been lost. I think rabbis have done an amazing job in turning themselves into online presence and telephone presence. And I think the stress that has caused, particularly with the amount of illness and the amount of hardship that they've had to contend with in terms of their membership, I think has been quite remarkable. And certainly the praise that we have received centrally, and I have received locally, from all of our rabbis, has been inspirational. So I do believe they're absolutely central to the way in which we function. And I believe that that if you look at our successful communities and our most successful communities, it's based almost nearly always around the charismatic rabbi and educator who acts as a magnet to those communities in terms of the inspiration that they provide.
I think you're right, but and it comes down to people rather than buildings. It's quite ironic, really, that the United Synagogue is all about building synagogues, and when we can't use the synagogue, what happens next? And I think, for me, there's been something very positive and very transformative about this particular period, and I think that we've seen an incredible increase in volunteers across the board, haven't we? And the expressions of chesed, of kindness, has been absolutely extraordinary.
I think what it's shown is that for those of us who have always said it's about people and it's not about buildings, I'm glad to say that we can say told you so. Because I think communities, as I said, this is why I brought on that point around institutions. I differentiated between institutions and buildings. Buildings house institutions. But what we've learned in the last few months is that actually institutions can exist beyond buildings. And I think what we've learned, again, I think we probably knew that, you probably knew that in terms of the position that you hold and the interactions that you have with people and the things that you see people do. I think buildings are clearly important and we miss them. And I think the quality of our interactions have definitely been impaired, certainly for those of us who are regular users of those buildings. But I think in terms of the institutions and community, I think we have seen that thank God, it does actually, I'm not sure the word transform is, but it's outside. It's more than the building. It's more than the building.
And yet, the buildings are very important too, because we come together in buildings. And that's a nice segue, Michael, because I've got a little surprise for you now. Because the last time you and I were in the real world, right, was happily in Hampstead Synagogue, right? We were there for what is known as the Salichot service. That is a midnight choral service that begins the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur period. And what I'm going to do now is to show you a little bit of a film. Take a look at this.
So beautiful.
I've got very emotional watching that.
Very beautiful. Well, actually, first of all, I used to be a member of the Shabbaton choir, so I have a personal affection for all of that. My dad was sitting just a few seats to my left, so.
Yeah.
But one thing I can tell you that that slichot, I don't think I'm breaking. I don't think I'm breaking any confidence here. That was professionally filmed, as you may recollect. You filmed that. That was your filming, was it? That we just watched.
No, that was nicked off YouTube, but
Okay.
there is.
Okay, well, there is a professional film that's being made of that, and it's looking as though, because we won't be able to have a large live slichot on the midnight before Rosh Hashanah this year, I think the plan is to debut it on US TV on that Saturday evening, when normally people would be going to their large slichot service, possibly in Hampstead Synagogue. So Hampstead Synagogue will be doing slichot again with the Shabbaton choir, please God, on September the 12th, round about midnight.
And it shows what we're missing, doesn't it? I mean, I should, by the way, acknowledge not only that we had Shabbaton choir, we had 2 chazonim, 2 cantors, we had 2 boys soloists, but also I think it exemplified the United Synagogue in so much as in the congregation were members of all Jewish denominations and non-Jewish people as well, from all representing all faiths and none, and it was a safe place to come together in prayer. And it was an electric experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not sure whether we should take a break now. We're going to take I think we should. We're going to take an advertisement break, which was going to raise a few eyebrows amongst some. But I think we're going to take a break now. Well, ladies and gentlemen, tonight is the very first day of USTV, the USTV, which is the United Synagogue's television channel, I think we can call it. A very, very exciting innovation. Mike, I wonder if you could perhaps talk a little bit about that, but also how innovation, particularly using the internet, has transformed the United Synagogue.
Well, I think it's part of what we talked about, really. It's how we've taken a form of community and realized a form of community in terms of our buildings was not going to function for a period of time, hopefully for not much longer, and that we needed to replace it because people want to interact. So each individual community, many of them facilitated by the Central United Synagogue function, have put on a plethora. I mean, it's just amazing what is going on. I know while I'm speaking, there's films being shown and there's shiurim being given. There are still shuls that are doing prayer services online. I think, and I've said this a number of times, but I won't stop saying it. For those of us who have spent time between, 6 o'clock and 7:30 on a Friday night, looking at the various United Synagogue communities, I don't know how many fold people have been taking part in a Kabbalat service whilst we've had the pandemic. Then we're looking at it that were doing it before pandemic. So there's been an enormous number of people who've been taking part in Kabbalat Shabbat services, many more than would have done in virtual. So the idea of USTV is to be a central conduit, really, for communities to be able to stream their content, and then for those of us that want to come afterwards and dip into something that's been recorded, it will be a huge repository of quality educational, cultural and prayer services that people will be able to interact with. So it's a very, very exciting, addition, we believe, to the United Synagogue offering.
One of the early offerings was the Mizrahi UK US Shabbaton, and that featured Michael Gove, the cabinet minister. It was supposed to be the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. And in fact, we were doing an event live just before Passover, and I was feeling very, very unwell. I was just watching behind the scenes of this activity. And the news came in that Boris Johnson had just been admitted to an ICU unit. And so I interrupted the event, and we said a prayer for Boris Johnson. And I'm not sure if it was my prayer or our cousin's prayer that did the trick, but it seemed to have done very well. But I want to just give a quote from Michael Gove, and I think it's quite interesting. He said, "British Jewry is a light shining in this darkness." And he goes on to say he expressed his gratitude for the solidarity you have shown and values that your community exemplifies, the values. And I think something very interesting has changed about our value, or our value set, particularly in the way that we celebrate bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, and now as they're beginning to be allowed weddings as well. Very, very small parties, if at all, over Zoom rather than in fancy hotels. Do you think that we've changed our values, that we've become this materialistic, and we've learned something in this isolating time?
It's a tough question. It has a big personal impact for me as well. So we mentioned before, I have 4 daughters and I have 1 granddaughter. My second daughter is due to be married at the beginning of September. So it's something that we've been going through in the last few weeks. Thank you. And look, I think it's about valuing what is important. So if you take the act of the bar mitzvah or the act of the wedding, I think intrinsically we all understand that it's the kernel that is the vital part of it, and it's the kernel that we as Jews understand to be the most important element of it. The party element is something that we've all loved and we all enjoy, but I think it is really the icing on the cake, and I think we've got to understand that it's the icing on the cake. And I think we as Jews do understand these things. I think when we do things, and whether it be the Seder table or the blowing of shofar on Rosh Hashanah or the Hanukkah lights, we know that it's those intrinsic things that are important, and the sort of the fluff and the celebration and the gimmicks around it are less important. But I think as a people, we do understand what is intrinsic and what is important. And for me, the act of the bar mitzvah or the ceremony of the chuppah and what that means, we know is important. And I think so long as we focus and we don't lose that, then I think we will begin to understand and perhaps adapt accordingly.
And that, of course, is about celebration, but there are other things when we want to commiserate with other people, particularly on death, etc. How has the Burial Society coped with the epidemic?
I was going through my own difficulties when lockdown happens, and so I had a very difficult process of being oversight of the Burial Society whilst I was dealing with my own loss. But I think it was just the scale and the speed of the change in scale, which was absolutely frightening. During the month of April 2020, we unfortunately buried 4 times the number of people that we buried in the equivalent month in 2019. And you can run organizations and you can have contingency planning, but you would never think that something would be 4 times. And what's more, while we were doing that, there was a fear that it could get much worse. So it was really just ensuring that our wonderful professional Chevra Kadisha staff in our cemeteries were looked after. We put them into bubbles. They were working 6 days a week. They didn't take holiday. We basically looked after them as much as we possibly could, because the compassion and the skill that they have, we knew would be very difficult to replace at such short notice. We put staff in, sort of support staff, into the Burial Society for a few weeks. And I won't go into the detail in terms of what we had to deal with in terms of supplies, but we were really, it was amazing. They were fantastic, and thank God we got through it. And I believe everybody that had to deal with the Burial Society was still, overwhelmed by the professionalism and the compassion. But there were times when we were very nervous, but thank God, and hopefully, we won't see that again.
Please God, yes. And I know one of our members who lost a parent, and we thought that was going to be on his own at the burial grounds. And I'm very pleased to hear that one of our members accompanied him at that time. So again, a sense of kindness and sense of community was there. But I think maybe on a more positive note, the Shiva House has completely transformed, because of course that's gone online as well. And the families have really taken charge of how they wish to memorialize the person they've lost. And that has been quite incredible, hasn't it?
Again, I think, I have to say, having been involved in one and attended a few, I think the online Shiva service has been, I can't use the word positive, but actually it seems to have meaning, actually. I think people have quite appreciated it, which they didn't think that they would. I know today there's been some further relaxation of the Shiva rules, so hopefully people will begin to have much more of a traditional Shiva, but in, again, a limited way in terms of appointment only, in terms of the prayer services. So yeah, look, I think, thank God, we are, we call ourselves, the Torah calls ourselves an Kashay Oref. We're a stiff-necked people, and we find our way through things. And thank God we have found our way through these difficult times, and we've adapted. And when people say we can't adapt, actually we can adapt. And but again, we still pray that we will go back to a semblance of what we experienced previously.
Earlier, you smiled when you said services online, because I knew what you meant, because technically, in the Orthodox part of the community, we don't consider it a full service, in that we're actually praying individually in our different locations, and we can't come together and create the quorum required to say certain prayers. And one of those prayers, of course, is the mourner's Kaddish, which is particularly difficult if you cannot say it as a mourner. So that must have impacted dreadfully on yourself as well as others. But can I just perhaps not talk about that, but talk about something else? And that is that services online, particularly Kabbalat Shabbat, which is the joyous welcome of the Sabbath, people have come together using Zoom technology. Men and women are on camera together. And it seems that there's a different feel to services, more of an equality. And I wonder, this is a challenge to Orthodoxy, isn't it? Finding the role for women within in how to express one's faith, etc. I said that rather clumsily. Forgive me. What do you think is going to be transformative about women and prayer going forward, do you think? Because it's already happening, isn't it? There was always a movement to get more women involved.
Now, look, I think the role of women has been constantly, I hope, is perceived. I think is the reality has been women have got more and more involved. You have a co-chair who's a female, and I think many shuls have it in all positions of our shul leadership. Women can take place. I think there is still work to be done in our services. I think everybody accepts that, and I think we need to continue to work with the Beit Din and with the chief rabbi in finding ways in which women can be involved, because there is no doubt it's one of the big risks. It's one of the big risks to our way of life, and it's a big, not our way of life. It's a risk to our organization and the and the positions that we take within our organization. So, and I just think it's something that we have to continually keep focused on. And certainly as trustees, we make it very clear we won't rest on our laurels. You know, we now have a women's officer. There's plenty of things that are happening, but I think, you know, making sure that there are more better female educators is an absolute necessity. But you're right, services is something that we do need to continue challenge on.
I'm going to. I think that there's a question that everybody's got on their mind at this particular moment, and to introduce that, I'm going to quote the chief rabbi who wrote in the JC in May, and he ends his comment piece saying this: in Kabbalistic writings, deep connections are drawn between Purim and Yom Kippur, explaining why the Torah calls the holiest day of the year Yom Kippurim, which can also mean a day like Purim. Unknown to us, Purim services this year inadvertently created a health hazard with tragic consequences. While it is too soon for us to know what guidance will be in place when the high holy days arrive, one thing is for sure: this time we cannot allow our holiest day of the year or any other to be a day like Purim. So there's two things here. Did we fail to put in the social distancing before Purim? Do you think we were slow on the uptake? Did we not have the understanding that we should have done? And could we have done things differently, do you think?
Well, we closed our shuls before the lockdown, so it was only a matter of days, but we did close our shuls before the lockdown. You know, a number of us who were involved in our daily conversations at that particular juncture, you know, a few times we have said to ourselves, were we too late? I don't know. You know, I'm not the government. I don't have the level of statistics which I assume that they had. We can only be reactive in that respect. So yes, we did close just before. If we would have closed 10 days earlier, would that have made a big difference to the level of loss that we had? No one knows. But it's certainly the reason why. And I think that article, the context of the Chief Rabbi's article, was taking it slowly, coming back, which is what we think we are doing. And, you know, social distancing and masks and the like, I think is very much, we're taking the government's legislation. We're not going to the very edge of it. We are making sure that we're very, very much compliant. And whilst they said we could go to 1 meter, we've kept it at 2 meters. So that was the context for him saying that. It's making sure that as we come back into normality, if that's the way to describe it, we will be even more cautious than we're being advised to be.
So at the moment, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is not looking like normal. I think that would be fair to say. Have the United Synagogue really clamped down on the policy for this particular period, or are they still in a wait and see, or do they really know what the experience is going to be for congregants?
So you've got the policy that currently exists, which by and large says that shuls can have something like a 20-25% capacity of maximum. That's if you roughly work out what it is with 2 meter distancing. I think when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, there will be further guidance around the prayers in terms of shortening services, because I think given the capacity issues which many shuls normally experience, it will probably be that we'll have to have multiple services so that people will be able to, so you'll be able to book into a specific service. I think it's still very much wait and seeing. I think the shofar, again, we're waiting for specific guidance on the blowing of the shofar, because the blowing of instruments is specifically excluded at the moment, as is singing. So I think we're still a couple of months away, and please God, you know, infection levels continue to fall the way that they seem to have done over the last 5 or 6 weeks. So I hope we will get closer to, again, normal, whatever normal means. But I'm sure that there will be some restrictions even when we get to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur.
You will know the expression of the 3 times a year Jew. The congregant will only turn up at the high holy day season. is there a risk that being almost given permission not to come this year will have an impact on the future?
Yeah, I was discussing this the other day in terms of, if I may, just taking that question up a level in terms of what is really our biggest challenges. And I think the biggest challenge that we have is that religious practice is habitual. You know, we do things out of course, whether you're a 3 times a day man or lady, or a once a week person, or a 3 times a year person. It's habitual. And what the last 4 months have done has basically stopped that habit. You know, you've kicked that particular habit. But it's our job, your job and my job, Gabriel, and our lay colleagues and our rabbinic colleagues is really to somehow get people to go back to their habits or their previous habits. And I think that is you're right about the 3 times a year Jew, but it's a much broader issue in terms of everybody. You know, there will always be, you know, when I was walking, you know, as we all do, we've done a lot of walking the last 4 months, and I would bump into many of my former people that I sat in shul with, or stood in shul with, or talked in shul, whatever it was. And, you know, you would bump into those people who said, Michael, come on, you've got to get the shuls open. I want to go back. And then there were those people who said, I'm not doing it. You know, it's far too dangerous. Wait, phone me next year. And then there were others who said, hey, you know what? I'm quite enjoying Saturday morning now. I'm doing my own thing. And, you know, I'm quite enjoying that now. So you know, it's brought a number of different reactions. And somehow we're going to have to try and herd people when the time is right, to try and get back to the habits that they had before. But you're right. It's a subset of a much larger issue, I think.
I think it's wrong to have parallels with the Second World War, but the synagogues didn't do particularly well in this country during the Second World War because everybody was a bit evacuated or overseas fighting, and that meant that there had to be a massive campaign to get people back into shul immediately after the Second World War. So I think that we need to have the imagination about planning for that eventuality, because it's going to take a lot of convincing to get people back into the right mindset, I think. But that's going to be a big challenge for leadership, I think.
You made the analogy of the Second World War. Actually, my great uncle, Uncle Monty, is doing something this evening, which I'm missing because of this, to celebrate online, of course, his third bar mitzvah. And what he continually says to me, actually, that the shuls never closed. Shuls didn't close, you know. So the analogy, I understand the analogy because obviously the Jews left, but actually the shuls themselves didn't close. So it is quite exceptional what we've had to do over the last 4 months. You know, as he said to me, you know, when his friends were killed, and he had a cousin who was killed in a bombing in the East End, he said, I could go to the Levaya and I could go to his shiva. I haven't been able to do that now. So it is, you know, you're right. There are analogies, but actually what we've just gone through is quite exceptional, and we mustn't lose sight of that. And coming out of it, we're going to have to really encourage each other. You know, I think it's going to test all of our sense of community.
I think you're right, and I think I was struggling. As you might recall, there was a meeting with the chief rabbi. I had the chutzpah, the cheek of asking him a question, and I kind of challenged him with 2 kinds of theological concepts for this particular era. And one was, I feel that we're in a collective sense of mourning. If we're all isolating, we're not caring about our own personal appearance, and we're not socializing, and we're not quite enjoying ourselves, it kind of the behavior that we would do if we were actually in religious mourning. I suppose it's an appropriate thing to say in the 3 weeks. And I think the chief rabbi favored that approach. He thought this was a very depressing time and there were only slivers of hope that he could see. But the other thing was that we were just experiencing a lockdown where we were allowed to walk around the block. And it was a beautiful sunny day, one day after another. We could walk out and you could see the flowers and the trees, and you really began to appreciate everything so much more in terms of nature. There was no pollution because there was no cars, there was no noise, there was no planes. The last time there were no planes in the sky was before the First World War. So I said to him, could we not see this as a Shabbat of Shabbats, a Sabbath of Sabbaths, where actually the world is correcting human behavior and say, back off, the world has to start to relax again and get back to its equilibrium. So I'm not quite sure if I understand what we're going through at the moment, but I think it's profound. It must be profound if we're all having similar experiences all around the world. It would be so depressing if we couldn't take a lesson out of this and behave very much positively in the future.
I think that's right. I mean, certainly I hear birds singing much more than I ever heard, I think. So yeah, it is amazing what's happened. Yeah. It's not.
We have a question, by the way, Michael, from James Lossos. And I think this is now talking about the future, which I think we should start to talk about now. What are the United Synagogue's plans for getting younger new rabbis in?
Well, I think well, if you look around our communities, I think the last few years we've seen a number of rabbis who have come into the rabbinate. We're currently supporting a number of rabbis, younger rabbis in Israel who are training. We hope to have one coming back very soon, which will be very exciting. So we are always on the lookout. We spend time, some of our people go at least once a year and do a tour of the yeshivot in Israel, and also go to New York, to Yeshiva University. We put on a fair in Israel once a year, which I've spoken at and the chief rabbi has spoken at, to try and attract younger rabbis, newer rabbis into positions. So I think we've done quite a lot, and I would say that if you look across the rabbinate, the average age of our rabbis certainly come down over the last few years. We can always do more, as always the case, but I'm quite encouraged by the progress that we've made there.
And it's not only rabbis, it's dayanim, the judges that are in our religious courts. I understand that one is already a position is being advertised, and there's going to be another vacancy. Am I right about that? No,
we are looking at bringing two in. One who would be a less experienced dayan in that respect, and we hope to advertise the second position within the next few weeks. But yes, it's all part of the same. It's all part of the same idea. We're blessed with a very strong London Beit Din with a very good reputation, a very high reputation across the world. It's important that we maintain that, but we've always got to look to the future, and we're currently doing that.
I suppose when you became president, you probably had a vision of the future that you were trying to aim for, and that's probably been shot to pieces. Where do you see the future of the United Synagogue in the next 5 or 10 years now?
I think I think we Jews, we love to move, and we have moved. I've talked about those first 5 synagogues. There's one of those left. We've now got a number of synagogues which we've closed. There are parts of London which were densely populated Jewish populations, and they've moved away quite significantly in the course of a generation and a half. The growth in Boreham Wood and the whole of the whole of Hertfordshire, so Boreham Wood, Bushey, and we can see the growth now moving up the A1 to Hatfield and Welwyn Garden City. So we're making investments into those areas where we see young people basically moving to residential property that's more affordable. So it's really reacting to where people are, and that's really one of our biggest challenges. Mill Hill East, which is only a mile or so down the road to where I'm living, there's been it's fantastic. I went to Dublin there the other Shabbat. By something like 20 years or more than 20 years, I was the oldest person davening on a Shabbat morning. So we can see these areas, but it's actually being able to, it's finding the resource really to actually support them. So this is where I see the growth. I think, making sure that we can help create community in the areas which traditionally we haven't had one. And that's really one of our biggest challenges.
In a previous talk in this series, I was reflecting on Hampstead, and I said, I think we've stopped becoming a congregation and we've become a community, because I think we've really begun to understand more about Jewish ethics in the personal space in a way that we didn't before. So I think this is going to be something that's going to be a big springboard for the future of the United Synagogue as we move forward. So I think we should be toasting the United Synagogue. We can wish them a l'chaim, a long life, right? And I think let's be very positive about the future of the United Synagogue, the future of Anglo-Jewish community. And well done to you, Michael, for all you do and for the entire United Synagogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to Madeline. Hopefully she's on camera, and she would like to wrap the things up. Yes, here she comes now.
Thank you very much, Michael, for an inspirational talk about the United Synagogue, helped by the launching of US TV, which I find very exciting. Also very exciting that Hampstead get a second bite at the cherry of Selichot this year. Looking forward to that. So thank you very much. And thank you, Gabriel, for, as usual, being an excellent master of ceremonies and asking questions. Thank you to those outside who've asked questions, and to the JC, our media partner, and our technical team. Just remains to tell you about the next Where Are We Now in our series, which is in 2 weeks' time, on trying to find the date, the 28th of July. And that's a very different topic. We have a panel of 3 to look at the cultural space. Now, obviously, over lockdown, our access to culture has been great, but always virtual. So what is happening to our great cultural institutions? How are we going to get them back on the road? So we've got an excellent panel. Michael Etherton, who is Chief Executive of UK Jewish Film. Francis Jeans, who is the new Interim Director of the Jewish Museum. And John Nathan, who is the JC's theatre correspondent. So that should be a very interesting evening. And as always, you can put your questions to the panel through our website and Shul Administrator. So we look forward to seeing you on the 28th of July. Thank you again to Michael and to Gabriel. And good night to everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Shabbat Shalom.